In this video, I'm gonna attempt to rank all the 19 Judas Priest studio album artworks from worst to best. And yes, I'm aware that no matter how I do it, you're still gonna disagree with me, and most likely will hate me for it. The album for Metal God's debut album, Rolla, released in 1974, was designed by the legendary illustrator John Pasche, the same guy who designed the iconic Rolling Stones tongue logo. Yet despite it being instantly recognizable, up to the point of speculations going around of it being banned by Coca-Cola themselves, many Judas Priest band members actually hated it at the very beginning, including KK Down, saying that it had nothing to do with the music Judas Priest propagated in their early days. Yet, you know what? I actually would dare to disagree with KK on this one. As looking back at it in retrospective, I actually think that it was a pretty fun, tongue-in-cheek kind of artwork, which in all honesty did actually suit the band's sound quite well back in 1974. By the way guys, just want to point out that I'm gonna go through the entire Judas Priest discography in its release order and rank each one of those albums as we discuss them in this video. And yes, I am going to include only the studio albums in this particular ranking. Although, in all honesty, Unleashed in these would rank pretty high up in my personal ranking. In 1976, Judas Priest released their last studio album with Gull Records, the iconic set Wings of Destiny, for which they commissioned the artist Patrick Woodruff to draw up one of the most legendary early metal artworks, featuring the fallen angel figure engulfed in flames, as well as a brand new gothic-style logo, which together with the artwork itself were supposed to symbolize the rebirth, suffering, and power. And you know what? If when it comes to Rolla, we can actually discuss whether the album artwork fit the music Judas Priest played in 1974, I truly believe that when it comes to said Wings of Destiny and the fallen angel represented on it, this discussion simply becomes irrelevant. As at least to me, this album artwork, which by the way for the very first time ever featured the legendary Judas Priest sign, symbolizes everything early heavy metal sound was about in the 1970s. And to this very day, I actually consider it to be one of the greatest album artworks ever made. Not only in metal, in music overall. So yes, it does automatically climb to the very top of our list, which for now of course only consists of 2 albums, but who knows, it might actually stay on top until the very end of this video. For their third studio album in 1977, Judas Priest have finally landed a deal with a major label, CBS Records, and together with the deal they also got their in-house art director, Roslaw Szaybo, who of course will work with the band in the future to oversee the artwork for what will become Sin After Sin. And for this album, Roslaw assigned Royal College of Art 1975 graduate Bob Carlos Clark to design the cover, featuring a mausoleum adorned with the symbols of cobras, eagle wings, and a skull with glowing eyes. And most Judas Priest fans know that this painting is actually based on a photograph of a mausoleum built in 1910 for Colonel Alexander Gordon, located on the grounds of Putney Vale Cemetery in London, which after its creation Roslaw paired with the John Pasche designed logo from the previous label, resulting in the most grotesque album artwork Judas Priest have ever released in their career, and which to this very day sparks quite a lot of controversy about what it actually represents and who the flip is that woman sitting in the corner there, which of course only adds to the mystique around the band's third studio album, and which is why it goes right above the Rolla release in my personal ranking. By the way guys, now that the new Judas Priest tour has started, I just want to point out that it's so freaking awesome to see so many of you metal pilgrims attending it in metal pilgrim merch. And thank you so much for all the photos and videos and all the footage you're sending me. It's really awesome to see so many of you out there. Although I just realized that this design might actually be more appropriate for this video. Yeah, that's better. In 1978, Judas Priest opened an absolutely new era of the band, which will eventually open a new era for heavy metal overall, but that's a topic for a different video. Nevertheless, for their first of the two albums released in 1978, the already familiar to all of us Roslaw Szaybo has designed one of the most futuristic and cutting-edge album artworks for that time, which eventually embodied everything the updated, electrifying Judas Priest sound stood for back at that time, as it was on the Stained Class album when Judas Priest started really combining the early dark heavy metal sound with the punk rock aggression, which will eventually create that fusion we will know heavy metal for in the 1980s. And in order to underline that metamorphosis, Roslaw has also come out with an absolutely new logo for the band. A logo which essentially symbolized parting ways with the early heavy metal sound of the first half of the 1970s and opened the gates to the new era of our favorite genre. And that's exactly why Stained Class is being ranked pretty high up in my personal ranking of Judas Priest artworks. And the same goes for the second album released that same year, Killing Machine or Hellbent for Leather, depends on how you know it, as it took everything Stained Class developed early that year and perfected it with a leather and sunglasses cyberpunk outlaw, which by now represented not only the band's outdated sound, but also the brand new look which Judas Priest adapted by the late 1978, and which later on will become synonymous with heavy metal overall, as it was the album which pretty much kicked off the entire leather and stud aesthetics all around the world. And then came 1980, which Judas Priest have already entered as a platinum selling band, but then they dropped British Steel, which turned them from the biggest heavy metal band on the planet to metal gods. And it was on that album on which Roslaw Szaybo has simply outdid himself, as to this very day the simple, dangerous, yet absolutely unforgettable razor blade in the hand is basically synonymous, and not only with Judas Priest, but with heavy metal overall. And right back then in 1980, it instantly became one of the most iconic album artworks ever released. So here's the thing, and you might hate me for it, but I honestly cannot decide whether to put it on the first or the second spot in this ranking. And precisely because the Sad Wings of Destiny and the British Steel ones are pretty much uncomparable. As if we're talking about the lighting or the complexity, yes, it is true, the Sad Wings of Destiny album artwork simply cannot be topped. But at the same time, when it comes to the cultural impact of one single album artwork, it is the British Steel one, which has essentially done for heavy metal more than any other album artwork in the Judas Priest discography. And thus, at least to me, these two artworks simply lie in different dimensions and therefore simply cannot be compared. And at least for now, they will be sharing the number 1 and 2 spots in my personal ranking.
Breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law, breaking the law.
But then comes 1981, and after pretty much a perfect strike for several albums in a row, Judas Priest actually managed to do something they never done before. And not once, but twice! On the same album! As here's the thing, I love Judas Priest, and I actually love each and every album released by this band, including Point of Entry. Seriously. But in all honesty, compared to pretty much anything this band has released before that, and to most of the stuff which followed after 1981, both the international and the US-Japan versions of the album artworks for this album, well, they simply sucked. And that's exactly why, no matter what anyone may say, and no matter how much you guys are gonna hate me for it, but they automatically go to the absolute bottom of this list. At least for now. But the craziest thing is that after a failed experiment of using abstract art for their album artworks, Judas Priest, instead of tuning it down and going a more conventional way, actually decided to crank it up to 11.
The numbers all go to 11. Look.
Inviting the illustrator Doug Johnson to produce an album artwork for their 8th studio record. And this time, they definitely did not miss. The legendary Screaming for Vengeance album features the Hellion Eagle diving with the deadly force, which eventually became an unofficial mascot of Judas Priest, symbolizing everything the band stood for: its speed, aggression, and a soaring sound. And to this very day, it simply blows my mind how an album artwork so simple yet daring and bold at the same time can represent and match the band's sound as much as Screaming for Vengeance does. So yes, at least to me, it is one of the greatest album artworks Judas Priest have ever had in their entire career. Given the mind-blowing success of the Screaming for Vengeance album, it is pretty understandable that for its follow-up, Defenders of the Faith, which, by the way, is no secret for anyone who is not new to this channel, is my favorite Judas Priest album, the band once again invited Doug Johnson to produce the artwork, and once again, he did not miss, creating the creature called the Metallion, a mechanical beast that protects heavy metal fans. And once again, he did it in an instantly recognizable Doug Johnson way, which simply screamed mid-80s style Judas Priest. Here's the craziest thing. When I first saw this album artwork back when I was a teenager, I didn't really care much for it. But today, years later, I simply love it. And I actually consider it to be one of the best ones Judas Priest have ever had in their career. And that's why I have to rank it pretty high up in my personal ranking. And the only reason I'll place it below Killing Machine is because of the cultural impact that 1978 album artwork had on the world of heavy metal. And in all honesty, if the Screaming for Vengeance one would not have been released just 2 years before Defenders of the Faith, it would most likely be ranked even higher than that. Yet those two weren't the only album artworks which Doug Johnson did for Judas Priest, as he actually crafted 3 album artworks for the Metal Gods. And actually all 3 of those were rather conceptual, and you actually are supposed to enjoy those as a one piece. And thus, for one of the band's most provocative studio albums, at least by then, Turbo, Doug Johnson actually created the most provocative album artwork this band has ever had. As to this very day, quite a lot of people actually believe that it's not really a gear lever that hand is gripping. Yet nevertheless, this album artwork once again perfectly captured now the synth-heavy sound and the 1980s digital aesthetics. And in all honesty, it did contribute to Turbo being one of the most successful albums in the band's entire career, which has actually brought this band to the mainstream even more so than they were there before 1986. And yes, even today, almost 40 years later, it is instantly recognizable even by non-Judas Priest fans. Here guys, just by the way, really quick one to point out that if you still haven't subscribed to this channel, especially if this is not the first Defenders of the Faith series video you're watching here, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing right now. Let's continue building this amazing heavy metal community together. To this very day, Ram It Down, the album which was never supposed to be released, is possibly one of the most divisive ones in the band's entire catalog, with some people deeming it forgettable and the other ones simply praising the incredible guitar work, the solos, and the mind-blowing vocals of Rob Halford on it. And by the way, I'm in the second group, but nevertheless, despite that division, I think no one has ever voiced any complaints about its album artwork, as although it was rather cartoonish, it represented its title perfectly: the raw force and impact heavy metal has on the earth. And in addition to everything, it was actually the very first album artwork designed by the legendary Mark Wilkinson for Judas Priest, who, as we all know, will work quite a lot afterwards with Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and gazillion other legendary heavy metal bands. And then comes everyone's beloved Painkiller, which the band is out on the road celebrating once again today in 2025, 35 years later after its release. And once again, we have nobody else but the legendary Mark Wilkinson doing an album artwork for what is possibly one of the most quintessential heavy metal albums ever released. And just as if on purpose, in order to prove that Painkiller is the album which will unite everything heavy metal stood for up until 1991, possibly up until today. As yes, I actually believe that if, an alien comes from outer space and asks me what heavy metal is about, this would be an album I would give for them to listen to. But once again, just as if to prove exactly that, this album artwork actually incorporated bits and pieces from the previous works of the Judas Priest catalog. As the craziest thing is that according to the Judas Priest lore, the metallic angel riding a dragon cycle is actually the same angel we saw on the Set Wings of Destiny album. Yet this time around, he's riding on a badass motorcycle in full glory and in full iron armor. No, seriously, what can be more metal than that?
None.
And one of the things which I personally love about this work is just how detailed it is, as it is one of the most detailed album artworks this band has had since Sad Wings of Destiny. And that's exactly why I simply have to place it pretty high up in my personal ranking, even above my beloved Defenders of the Faith. 7 years later, Judas Priest released the first of the two albums released without the legendary Rob Halford on vocals. And here's the thing, no matter what you personally think about Jugulator, whether you like Tim Ripper Owens' era of the band or not, one thing is pretty clear. The Jugulator album artwork, once again produced by the legendary Mark Wilkinson, is simply incredible. There is actually a catch. Not the one which actually made it to the release, but the full version created by Mark for Judas Priest. And to this very day, I have no idea how the flip they decided to not go with a full album artwork for this album, as it would have made it so much better. And thus, for the purpose of this video, I'm actually going to rank that one, which I believe is the only true album artwork for Jugulator. And I will rank it pretty high up in my personal list. Yet, in all honesty, as much as I love defending Tim Ripper Owens' era of Judas Priest, and there is a lot to defend about it, in all honesty, one thing I simply cannot go for, and it is concerning the Demolition album artwork. As in all honesty, how the flip anyone thought that this would be appropriate to be released by one of the greatest heavy metal bands to ever walk this earth? To this very day, I simply don't get it. Everyone who is not new to this series knows that Angel of Retribution holds a very special place in my heart. I simply love that album. And I actually think that it was specifically awesome as a reunion record with the legendary Rob Halford. And when it comes to its artwork, I honestly don't really mind it, and I do understand the aesthetics Judas Priest were going for, continuing the whole Painkiller vibe on it. But at the same time, I actually think that specifically for a reunion record like Angel of Retribution was, and specifically mentioned the incredible music which is actually on this album, Judas Priest could have gone with something slightly more sophisticated than that. And although I think it's not really that bad, I can't really rank it high up in my personal list. And then came 2008, and with it came the release of the band's most controversial studio album ever, the experimental Nostradamus, which once again I simply love to defend. And I do remember vividly the day in 2008 when I went out and picked up this album in Boston's Newbury Comics, and as much as I actually enjoyed the music on it, I simply could not really care that much about the album artwork on it. But the craziest thing is that the booklet for that album actually includes some incredible masterpieces done by the legendary Mark Wilkinson. And to this very day, I simply do not understand why those were hidden in the booklet, and the one we know for it being the album artwork made it on the front page of it. And although no, it's not the worst album artwork Judas Priest have ever had, well, it's not the best one either.
I am Nostradamus. Do not forsake.
For the first album with their new guitarist Richie Faulkner, Judas Priest decided to once again bring back the legendary Painkiller character, and once again invited Mark Wilkinson to do the album artwork. Yet in honesty, as much as I like reimagining Painkiller all over again, I actually didn't really care that much for the Redeemer of Souls album artwork. And not really because it's bad, but for some weird reason it didn't really speak to me that much. Although I have to point out that it is a pretty cool album cover, yet nevertheless not as cool as it could have been, at least to me. But here's the craziest thing, that when it comes to Firepower, which is supposed to be much more minimalistic than Redeemer of Souls, or pretty much anything the band has done before that, aside Demolition, I simply loved it! I loved everything about it. And to this very day, I actually believe that it perfectly captures the essence of this album and the sound Judas Priest propagated back on it. And the funniest thing is that I don't even know what exactly I love about it. I just simply do. And I will actually dare to rank it higher than the legendary Stain Class, Turbo, or even Ram It Down.
With your mind in a vice, he twists and turns with terror.
And thus we come to the band's latest studio output, Invincible Shield. And once again, an album on which they invited nobody else but Mark Wilkinson to create the artwork for it. And here's the thing, I know that a lot of people didn't really care that much for the Invincible Shield artwork, but when it comes to me, I really liked it. And I specifically like how flexible it actually is, and in how many different circumstances you can use this shield. And although in all honesty I can't really rank it as my top album artwork in the Judas Priest discography, I still will rank it above many other album artworks which I actually enjoy. But nevertheless, that's it! This is my personal ranking of all of the Judas Priest album artworks. Although I really hope that soon there will be more to rank, if you know what I mean.
So excited! So excited!
But what about you? Which is your personal favorite Judas Priest album artwork, and which is your least favorite one? Please let us know in the comments. So thank you so much for supporting the show and supporting me and Ukraine through this very difficult time. We will prevail. Slava Ukraini!